It's evil. Charlie and I have always been very clear on our stance. Israel.
A woman is the neck. And the neck can make the head move whatever way she wants.
Throwback footage just popped back up out of nowhere, and people who've been locked in on this story are saying this changes everything. This isn't just another clip of Erika acting a little off on camera or sparking random chatter. No, this hits way different. This isn't about another timeline mix-up or some money story not adding up. What we're looking at now is straight-up visual proof. A real, dated photo that ties things together in a way nobody can ignore. And when you line this up with everything already known about the pressure Charlie Kirk was dealing with in the final stretch of his life, it lands heavy. Like nothing else we've seen so far. The footage and images show Erika Kirk standing right next to Yair Netanyahu, the son of Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu. And it's not just that they're in the same frame. It's the vibe between them that's setting people off. The body language, the closeness, the way they look so relaxed around each other. It's got people talking fast and loud, because this isn't some stiff, formal handshake at a public event. People are saying this looks personal, like two people who go way beyond just knowing each other on a surface level. The kind of comfort you only get when there's real history there. Now, before anything else, the timeline of this photo needs to be locked in. Because that date, it's a massive piece of the puzzle, and it might be one of the most important details in this entire situation. The image traces back to a Facebook post dated June 13th, 2019, and that date is raising serious eyebrows. That moment falls right in the window when Erika was just starting to build her relationship with Charlie Kirk. According to the official version, this was early days, when she had just entered his life and things were beginning to grow into what later became their marriage. And yet, at that exact same time, she's seen standing next to Yair Netanyahu, looking completely at ease in his presence. That detail alone has people treating this like a key piece of a much bigger puzzle. The caption on the post said it was about introducing the Arizona-Israel Public Affairs Committee and welcoming Yair Netanyahu to the state. Now, that might sound routine on the surface, but when you really look at it, there's more going on here than a simple introduction. You've got an Israeli public affairs organization operating in Arizona, the same state that would later become the core of Charlie's political influence. And right there in 2019, Erika is already connected, standing inside a space that links political organization with international figures, at the exact time she's stepping into Charlie Kirk's world. That overlap is what's making people stop and look twice. And then there's another face in that photo that people instantly recognized. Tyler Bauer. Not just anyone, but the same Tyler Bauer who keeps coming up again and again in this story. The one identified in multiple discussions as the person who helped connect Erika and Charlie, the one who reportedly advised Charlie on how to approach her, and the same person now pushing the narrative of Erika as Charlie's political successor. Now picture this clearly. Tyler Bauer, Erika Kirk, and Yair Netanyahu, all in one frame, at one moment in time. That image alone is driving a wave of questions that just keeps getting louder. All three of them, in the same frame in 2019 at an Israeli public affairs event in Arizona. That exact setting, that exact moment, is what pushed this from just an interesting photo into something people are now calling a possible cornerstone in the so-called handler theory that's been building for months. Because think about how this lines up. If Tyler Bauer was the link that brought Erika into Charlie's life, and both Tyler and Erika were already tied to organized Israeli public affairs circles before that even happened, then this starts to look a lot more structured than random chance. It raises a sharper question. Who was behind these connections, and what was the goal? That's where things start to feel more serious, more focused, and a lot harder to brush off. The timeline, the relationships, the overlap, it all starts stacking in a way that people are finding difficult to ignore. Now shift over to what Charlie himself was reportedly dealing with, because this part isn't just theory or online chatter. There are messages that were shared publicly by Candace Owens on her podcast, presented as leaked texts. When you line those messages up next to that 2019 photo, the whole situation starts to look a lot more intense. According to those texts, Charlie described a very specific kind of pressure tied to donor support. He mentioned losing a major donor, reportedly around $2 million a year, connected to disagreements involving Turning Point USA and Tucker Carlson. That alone is a huge financial and political hit. And then comes the part that really caught attention. He reportedly wrote something that sounded like a major shift away from positions he had held publicly for years. That kind of reversal is exactly why people are digging deeper and asking bigger questions. He reportedly said that certain donors were feeding into stereotypes and trying to pressure him, making it clear he would not be pushed around, and that it left him feeling like he had no choice but to step away from the pro-Israel cause. Think about that for a second. This is Charlie Kirk, someone who had spent years as one of the loudest and most visible pro-Israel voices in conservative politics. This wasn't some small tweak in opinion or a quiet policy shift. This sounded like a complete break from a position that had shaped his public image, his funding streams, and major parts of his network. Behind closed doors, with specific financial stakes on the line, he was describing pressure that had become too much to handle. That kind of statement carries weight, and people are not overlooking it. Now place those reported messages right next to that 2019 photo. Erika, Tyler Bauer, and Yair Netanyahu, all at an Israeli public affairs event in Arizona. When those two pieces are viewed together, they spark a wave of questions that keeps growing louder in certain circles. People are asking, was Erika connected in any way to the same networks tied to that pressure? Was her role in Charlie's life purely personal? Or did it overlap with those same institutional relationships being discussed in the messages? These are serious claims, and they're being debated intensely. And if, and that's a big if, those connections were real, then it pushes people to look even harder at what happened on September 10th. It's the kind of possibility that shifts how everything else gets interpreted. Another detail that keeps coming up is the contrast in Erika's public reactions. Some observers point to a noticeable difference between how she responded emotionally to Charlie's death versus how she responded to criticism involving Israel. That contrast is something people find hard to reconcile, and it continues to fuel ongoing discussion and scrutiny. People who followed Erika's public appearances in the weeks and months after Charlie's assassination started pointing out something that didn't sit right with them. They described her grief as controlled, almost too polished, like it was being managed instead of spilling out naturally. The kind of raw, unpredictable emotion most people expect after a loss like that just didn't seem to show up the way they thought it would. The tears people assumed would come without warning, the kind that hit hard and don't hold back, were either missing or seemed difficult to bring out. That detail alone had already made some viewers uneasy, and it kept coming up again and again in discussions. But then came a moment that really got people talking. In a separate interview, when Erika spoke about people who hate Israel, she became visibly emotional and started crying. And this time, the reaction looked completely different. The tears appeared immediate, natural, and deeply felt, and viewers quickly noticed the contrast. That difference didn't go unnoticed. People who had been watching closely began comparing both situations side by side, and the gap between those emotional responses felt hard for them to explain. It became one of the most talked about and uncomfortable observations surrounding her public appearances. Some commentators went as far as saying that she showed stronger, more spontaneous emotion in that interview than she had during moments focused on her husband's death. That claim, paired with the previously discussed messages about donor pressure and the 2019 photo linking her to public affairs networks, has only added more fuel to ongoing debates. When all these elements are stacked together, the reported texts, the photograph, the timeline, and now these public reactions, it creates a narrative that certain groups find difficult to ignore. And on top of that, people have started re-examining Erika's own account of Charlie's final night in mourning, looking at those details with a whole new level of scrutiny. Looking at everything that's come out, one detail Erika shared has people paying very close attention. She said that the night before his final speaking event, Charlie chose to sleep in their toddler's room instead of the main bedroom where she was. Her explanation was simple, that he wanted a good night's rest before an important day. But for a lot of people who followed him closely, that reasoning isn't landing easily. Charlie had built a public image around strong family values, close connection, and prioritizing his marriage and home life. That's why this detail feels off to some observers. A man leaving the shared bedroom and choosing to sleep separately the night before a major event doesn't line up, in their view, with someone who was completely at ease in his relationship. To them, it doesn't read like a random decision. It reads like distance, like something happened, a disagreement, a moment of tension, or something deeper that made sharing that space feel difficult that night. That interpretation is exactly why this detail is being picked apart so intensely. Now add in everything else, the 2019 photo, the connections people are debating, and the reported messages about donor pressure. And suddenly, this moment takes on a whole different level of significance. People are starting to ask whether Charlie may have confronted Erika about those connections, about what that photo seemed to represent, and whether that led to a serious breakdown between them. That question alone has shifted how many are looking at this timeline. Because if something like that did happen, it could explain why he chose to step away from the bedroom that night. It turns a small detail into something that feels much bigger. Then there's the morning of September 10th, which Erika also described publicly. And this part is just as striking to people. She said their only interaction that morning was brief. Charlie came into the room, grabbed his wedding ring and a neck chain, and left for his event. That was it. No goodbye, no hug, no real conversation, no visible moment of connection between two people who, publicly, presented themselves as deeply close partners. And for many watching, that absence stands out just as much as anything else, because it feels so different from what they expected to see. That level of emotional distance is what's really sticking with people. A man waking up, grabbing his wedding ring, and walking out without saying a word to his wife on what would end up being the last morning of his life hits very differently when you place it next to the possibility of a serious disagreement the night before, and the ring detail on its own has sparked a lot of focused discussion. Because think about what that actually suggests. If he had to pick up his ring before leaving, that means he wasn't wearing it when he woke up. That's not something people are brushing past easily. A man who removes his wedding ring during a night spent in a separate room, then makes a point to grab it on his way out, raises questions about where his head was at in that moment. At the very least, some observers see it as a sign that his relationship to that symbol, his marriage, may not have been as steady as it appeared on the surface. Now, to be clear, none of these details prove that a specific confrontation happened. These are based on Erika's own public descriptions, and the conclusions people are drawing fall into interpretation, not confirmed fact. But when you line these moments up with everything else that's been discussed, the pattern they create is one that many find hard to ignore. One reaction that really captured how a lot of people are processing this came from a widely shared comment online. It said, "Can you imagine Charlie saying privately that he was done with the pro-Israel cause, texting it to someone he trusted, and then days later being dead, while his wife, who was apparently connected to Netanyahu's son as far back as 2019, cries publicly about people who criticize Israel while barely shedding a tear?" That quote spread fast, because it put into words what many were already thinking, not as a conclusion, but as a reflection of the questions that just keep building. For many people following this closely, it's the combination of everything: the reported texts, the photograph, the emotional contrast, and the timeline that forms the core of what's being discussed. It's not just one detail on its own, it's how all of them stack together that's driving the conversation forward. Another commenter pushed things even further, pointing to reports of Erika traveling to Miami and possibly reconnecting with figures from her past, while all these questions were already circulating. To some observers, that kind of move didn't look cautious, it looked confident. And that confidence is exactly what raised eyebrows. Because the argument being made is simple. If someone was truly worried about how these connections might be perceived, they might act more carefully. But actions that seem to reinforce those same connections? That's what people are zeroing in on and debating heavily. Now, the so-called handler theory that's been building over months isn't being framed by its supporters as some over-the-top movie-style storyline. It's being presented as something more grounded, more calculated, and more strategic. At its core, this idea suggests the possibility that Erika entered Charlie's life through networks that had a vested interest in his platform, his organization, and his influence. Not in a dramatic spy sense, but in a way that centers on proximity, access, and long-term positioning. According to that line of thinking, her role would have been about staying close, influencing direction over time, and eventually being in place to take control of what he built if the situation ever called for it. That perspective remains unproven, but it's the angle that continues to fuel intense discussion across those following the story. And this is exactly where the conversation starts to split in a major way. Because while some people are looking at all these pieces and seeing a pattern that feels too specific to ignore, others are stepping in and warning that this could be a case of connecting dots that don't actually prove anything on their own. Critics of this entire theory are pointing out something important. None of these elements by themselves confirm intent or coordination. A photo at a public event, reported messages about donor pressure, differences in emotional expression, even personal relationship details. All of these can have explanations that don't point to anything deliberate or hidden. That pushback has been getting louder, especially from those who argue that high-profile political spaces naturally create overlap between people, organizations, and events. In that view, what looks like a network could simply be the result of operating in the same circles. And when it comes to the more personal details, like where Charlie slept or how he acted that morning, skeptics argue those are deeply private moments that outsiders may be misinterpreting without full context. Human behavior, especially under stress, doesn't always follow a clean or predictable pattern. Still, despite those counterarguments, the theory hasn't gone away. If anything, the debate itself is what keeps it alive. One side sees a structured pattern forming, while the other sees a series of unrelated details being pulled together into a story that may not hold up under scrutiny. And right now, that tension between suspicion and skepticism is exactly what's keeping this entire situation in the spotlight. With more people stepping in, more opinions forming, and more questions continuing to surface. And this is where everything comes to a head. After all the timelines, the photos, the reported messages, and the personal details, what's left isn't a clean conclusion. It's a situation filled with questions that people are still trying to make sense of. Some see a pattern that feels too aligned to ignore, while others see a series of coincidences being pushed into a narrative that goes further than the facts can support. That divide is exactly why this story keeps gaining attention. Because no matter which side people fall on, the details are hard to completely dismiss. What's clear is that the combination of public information, personal accounts, and online discussion has created a version of events that continues to evolve. New interpretations keep forming, old details keep getting re-examined, and the conversation isn't slowing down anytime soon. At the same time, it's important to remember that not every question has a confirmed answer, and not every connection means something deeper is happening. That tension between what's known and what's assumed is what makes the situation so intense and so debated. Now it's your turn to weigh in. What do you think about everything that's come out? Does it all connect, or are people reading too far into it? Drop your thoughts in the comments and join the conversation. And if you want more breakdowns like this, make sure to hit like, subscribe, and share this with anyone who's been following the story, because this is one people are going to keep talking about.